Sorry, Trish.
It's okay.
I'll forget about you. So I'm going to call the meeting of the Special Board of Aldermen to order on March 12th, 2019 at 7 p.m. here in the Aldermanic Chamber. Prayer will be offered by City Clerk Trish Pietzu, and Alderman at Large Mike O'Brien will lead us in the pledge to the flag. It is the 7th. My apologies. March 7th.
Almighty God, we have the high honor and the serious duty to manage the affairs of our beloved city. Fill us, O God, with a spirit of unity and understanding, which enables us to face our multiple problems with a serene mind, with justice and charity for all, so that any and all decisions made by us will always be for the betterment and greater happiness of all our fellow citizens. So help us, God. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman O'Brien.
Present.
Alderman Gidge. Alderman Harriet Gathright. Alderman Dowd.
Present.
Alderman Clee.
Here.
Alderman Laws.
Here.
Alderman Lopez. Alderman Karen. Alderwoman Kelly.
Here.
Alderman Jettie.
Here.
Alderwoman Malizi Gola.
Present.
Alderman Tenza.
Present.
Alderman Schmidt. Alderman Wilshire.
Here.
We have 10 members present.
And Alderman Lopez did inform me that he was unable to be here this evening. Also in attendance, His Honor Mayor James Donches and Corporation Counsel Steve Bolton. We also have with us this evening the CFO John Griffin and Chief of Staff Kim Kleiner. Communications?
Communication from Lori Wilshire, President, Board of Aldermen, relative to a special Board of Aldermen meeting.
Being no objection, I'll accept the communication and place it on file. Management audit report for the assessing department dated March 1st, 2019. At this point, I'll turn it over to you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Madam President. We're here tonight, and as you said, I'm here with CFO Griffin and Ms. Kleiner to present the audit of the assessing department, which was initiated earlier this year and was completed recently. I think you all got copies of the written audit maybe last Friday via email, and I assume you've at least had a chance to look at it. And I think what the audit sets forth is a number of steps that we can take, hopefully in the immediate future, to streamline and improve our assessing function. And if some of these steps you, as the Board of Aldermen, need to approve, we hope that you will do that with dispatch so that we can begin as quickly as possible undertaking the various improvements that are outlined in the audit. Now, Mr. Griffin and Ms. Kleiner are going to talk about more of the details, but I thought I would take a few moments to kind of set the stage for what we're talking about. First of all, the audit was done of the assessing department in Nashua. The assessing department did not do the recent revaluation. That was done by KRT. And because of issues that we had identified actually together, we discussed this when the money was appropriated to bring KRT in. We decided to go outside the city for the evaluation to engage an expert assessing firm, KRT, who had extensive experience in New England and in New Hampshire, to do the work. And there were various reasons for that, and I believe it was the right decision because the work that they did, I think the evidence, the facts show was very sound. They've come up with a very consistent set of results, and they did a very, very thorough job. They visually inspected every property. Now, they, of course, did not go into the properties, but they visually inspected every property. And working with the personnel in the assessing office in terms of identifying any discrepancies that are visually apparent from the outside of the building, because Lynn in the assessing office routinely reviews photographs to determine if there's anything visible on the outside that's not in the property records. I think they were able certainly to identify any errors that might have existed with respect to the external portions of the structures, the size, the decks, and all that. We've received about 250 or something less than 300 abatement requests. This is a typical number for the revaluations that have been done over the years. As you know, this was a state-ordered revaluation. The state law says that every city and town has to do one every 5 years. This was conducted in 2018, and the last revaluation was in 2013. So the number of abatement requests that the city has received is typical for the last few, except that in 2005, which was several revaluations ago, there were 1,500 abatement requests at that time. And when the last full measure and list was done, which was in the early 90s, I'm not sure of the number, but there were a lot more than 300. So I don't think that anything out of the ordinary has occurred with respect to people thinking or believing that their new assessment is incorrect and seeking a review of the decision through the process that is available to them, which is, of course, the Board of Assessors, then to the Board of the Land and Tax Appeals at the state level or the Superior Court. And of course, everybody has a right to file an abatement, and anybody who disagrees with their assessment hopefully will have done that. Certainly reasonable people can often disagree about what an assessment is. It's a science, but not an exact one, especially when we're talking about more properties that are more unique, properties that aren't exactly like the house or the condo next door. There are often good faith disagreements about what assessment should be, and that's the reason for the appeal process, so that someone who's outside the city or outside the assessing office and ultimately outside the city can review the facts and determine what the proper assessment, at least in their judgment, should be. Now, there are a number of, I think, significant recommendations made in the audit. One of those involved, and you'll get the details from Mr. Griffin, Ms. Kleiner, but the one that the larger ones that I thought were worth mentioning myself are, as you know, the audit recommended that we eliminate the chief assessor position and instead return to the system of, and I will discuss this in a little more detail, of having many of the departments in City Hall who work together run by a new administrative services director. The administrative services director is a position that was first established during the administration of Morris Arell in the late 70s to help bring more effective management to City Hall departments. And the City Administrative Services Director, as the audit recommends, would oversee a number of internal functions, as it did before: assessing, personnel, purchasing, risk, and the city clerk and others that are within city departments, GIS, IT. The Administrative Services Director was a position in city government through the administration of Morris Arell, through my first administration, through Wagner, Davidson, and Streeter. Then Mayor Lozo, early in her tenure, decided that, at least in the way she wanted to run city government, this was not a necessary position, and she preferred to have something called city stat. And the administrative services position was removed, and instead a city stat director was established. Then after a few years, apparently it was decided that city stat was not necessary, and for cost-saving measures that position was removed. But the administrative services director was not reestablished. Now, the people who've served in that position over the years have tended to be people who know city government very well, but who've had a business background or some management background. The first administrative services director who served for some period of time was Russ Marcoux, who'd been on the Board of Aldermen, who was a previous employee. He'd worked for Purity Supreme and had an accounting background. He moved on, and later Maureen Lemieux came in as Administrative Services Director after having served, I think, a short time on the Board of Aldermen, someone with another business accounting background. Alderwoman Malizi Golia probably knows her from Ward 8. So she served with, I think, very great skill for quite a while, but when the position was phased out, she took a job as CFO, I believe, in Newton, for the city of Newton, Massachusetts, and still works there, and very successfully. So that is the history of the position. And the point here is to, and I will address the assessing function in a minute, but the point is, at least of what we've proposed now, is a few things. Number one, all of these functions need to work effectively together. IT, assessing, GIS. These are the building and planning people as well. These are people who need to work together in order for city government to function most effectively. And when the administrative services position was eliminated, all of these functions were transferred to the CFO, and in our case, Mr. Griffin. And the problem with that is that the CFO's primary responsibility is to manage the finances of the city, to do the budgeting, to manage the audit, the annual audit that takes place, to do the so-called CAFR, which is the annual financial report, to generate all of the financial reports, to pay the bills, to do all of the financial functions that a city of this size requires. And when these extra responsibilities, beyond really what a CFO should be doing, were transferred to Mr. Griffin, the CFO, I think it was intended as kind of a temporary fix, but it became permanent. And I know he wasn't particularly looking for this, and it put him in a position where he could not give sufficient time and attention to these additional functions that were placed under his responsibility, because his primary job is all the financial work and the budget and the other things that I've mentioned. And I think as you've seen him come before you over the years on the budget issues and financial issues that often come to the Board of Aldermen, you understand that he's very capable as a financial manager and as a financial planner. But I think putting all of this under the CFO was never was in retrospect a mistake, and really the Administrative Services Director is a position and a responsibility that we should return to. So the two personnel recommendations that the audit recommends is the elimination of the one job and the creation of the other, which is basically a cost-neutral transition, because the salary for an administrative services director might be slightly higher, but is approximately equivalent to what the assessing manager makes, which is more than $100,000. Now, you could ask, well, how would the city function without a assessing manager? Well, first of all, the Administrative Services Director would now take much more direct responsibility and involvement in the assessing function. Number two, there is a supervisor assessor, certified as a supervisor in the assessing office, who can serve as sort of a working supervisor. And number three, as we all move forward on this project together, if we think that we need more firepower, more expertise in the assessing office, we can contract with an outside firm to provide some degree of assessing oversight. Now, this is not actually a new idea. When Brian McCarthy was still with us, and when he was president, we, on several occasions, talked about the possibility, and this is before the revaluation was certainly over, and maybe even before it began, we talked about the possibility of phasing this position out and bringing in a contract manager. The fact is, the last time that this position went open, there was only one applicant, only one meaningful applicant, and really, so the city had really, if we were going to fill the job, had really no choice as to who to hire. So I think if we monitor the management carefully, if the new administrative services director does that and implements the recommendations in detail that are going to be discussed by the other two people, we can quickly, with reasonable dispatch, improve and strengthen the assessing function of the city. Now, another big recommendation that's being made is that we undertake a full measure and list assessment. That means go out and inspect all the properties internally, seek to inspect all the properties internally. That is an expensive proposition, but I believe we should undertake it. Costs between $1 million, but probably and $1.5 million, probably closer to $1.5 million. But this could be done over several years in preparation for the next revaluation. A problem that we have both in terms of the property records, but also just in terms of perception, is that the city has done no full measure and list since the revaluation of 1991. Now, as it happened, 1992. But this revaluation began in 1990 or 1991, the last full measure and list, when, believe it or not, I was the mayor. So the last time a full measure and list was done, I was basically responsible or in charge of the city while it was being undertaken. It was not actually implemented, or when it did not go into effect until 92. It took quite some time, I think 18 months to accomplish it. It was a bonded project, and it went into effect in 1992, but that was the last time it was done. Other communities, no question about it, have done this more frequently. Manchester has done it a couple of times since that time. So that is a recommendation that we should undertake, and in my view is worth doing. So if we create the new position of Administrative Services Director to make sure that all of these functions are working together effectively, if we remove the Assessing Director, we monitor it, we retain the flexibility to bring in by contract a more assessing management if that is necessary, and implement all of the other recommendations which I think you're going to hear about. I think that we can make great progress in terms of the function and in terms of restoring any loss of public confidence in the function. But I would return to the point that the revaluation itself done by KRT is sound, has achieved equity between properties, which is the underlying purpose of a revaluation. At least equity within the data we have. Maybe that equity will be improved by the full measure and list revaluation or inspection that we undertake. But at least, given what we have now, the equity relative equity within the properties has been achieved by the full measure and list. And I guess in terms of how we should proceed, I would ask this. We have faced more controversial issues than this before. I mean, certainly we've heard some valid criticism regarding some of the things that have occurred in the assessing office. But we have faced more, and the audit bears that out. But we've faced more controversial issues than this before. So if we are going to move forward as a community, which I hope we will do, I think that it would be better and more constructive if that no one used sort of flaming rhetoric, you know, hyperbole about what's going on. No one down in the assessing office, in my opinion, intentionally did anything wrong or committed any kind of malicious acts. They might have achieved an assessment or arrived at assessment that people disagree with, or maybe that's incorrect. But it was done in good faith, based upon the expertise of the people down there. They are public servants who've been working for the city. They're not highly paid. They do the best job they can. It's, like any umpire, they're probably right most of the time, but occasionally a ball gets called as a strike, and so occasionally a strike gets called as a ball. But that is inherent in the sort of the human condition. So I think our task as leaders of the city, mine as the mayor, should be to work with the people down there, give them more tools, improve the software, and you'll hear all of the details, and listen to the remarks and comments that as we have done, and move forward with as much unity as we can, with as much goodwill as we can, mutual goodwill, so that as a community we can achieve an assessing function that is effective, which has public confidence, and which will achieve at least the greatest degree of accuracy that within an exact science is possible. So with that, I turn it over to Mr. Griffin and Ms. Kleiner. I mean, I'm available for questions, but probably it's best just to get the whole thing out. Why don't I turn it over to Mr. Griffin and Ms. Kleiner to talk through any of the details. They obviously can answer your questions as well.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. If it pleases the board, I'd like to walk a little bit through the methodology used for the audit. I want to state that this is a common methodology that is used with any management audit report. This was not designed by us, although this is a structure that I have used before. Generally most used in inventory management, purchasing, receivables. I've seen it used in production efficiencies, things of that sort. So when you get to the back and you're reading through the questions, those questions were not designed by us. They are designed by a group that puts together management audit reports, and they're from a set of questions that are commonly used and that I've used before in other audit reports. So Mr. Griffin and I started the process shortly after the mayor instructed us to do so in last November. We conducted interviews with the with the questions that you see in the back of the report with every single employee in assessing, including the chief assessor. They were separate interviews. Mr. Griffin conducted a set, and I conducted a set, and they were very thorough. We then moved from assessing all the internal policies within the department and the individual employees' knowledge of such policies. We moved through policies and standards that are written by the International Association of Assessors. And we looked at those in comparison to ways that our internal policies were written. We then looked at different operational procedures and the way that work was flowing through the department between different employees. We studied the Board of Assessor meeting minutes and agendas, their board packets. We worked through budget information. We had consultations with various other city departments, including IT. And we consulted with various outside organizations and consultants that we've dealt with, Patriot Systems, KRT, CDM Smith. From there, we quickly then moved to looking at what we could find for various best practices, which is a common procedure. We sat with many of our internal employees in IT and worked through how the system flows and our data flows from various organizations. So you have assessing, then you have the tax system, you have building permits that are feeding, all these systems have to interact. And we wanted to see how that was doing. So often when you have data and it is moved from a variety of different software systems, the more systems that data is being flowed through or entered into manually, the more areas that you may have room for error. And what we saw is there were a number of software systems that were still being used within the city, even after we had bought and implemented Patriot Systems, and now we have bought and implemented Munis. Older systems that really can be eliminated and we recommended should be at this point. So that was quite a process, working through all those systems, seeing how those systems worked. We then sat with individual assessors and walked through how they work through their day and what they see and how they walk through an assessment on the system, the AssessPro system. We then looked at how the public may view their individual property cards. So we have a system that is on our website, and we looked at how that flowed. And what does that look like? And is that giving the same information? And can that be done more effectively and more transparently? So we reviewed those systems as well. We then started to come up with what we saw as some of our observations during both the organizational, meaning the employee part of the audit, as well as the policy review, as well as the information system review. Those you can find on page 18. I'll speak to just a couple of them and then let Mr. Griffin fill in. The assessing department itself works on two different major functions. You have the administrative staff that deals with the abatements and the exemptions and customer service. Then you have the assessors, which are both residential and commercial. And what we saw was they really operated quite independently of each other. There was no staff meetings or organizational meetings where they all came together to share information, although it is one process. So that was one of our areas where we started to look at whether they are actually sharing information effectively within the department. And we didn't feel that that was being done the best way that it possibly could. Generally, it was much better for efficiency purposes if anyone within the function should have some knowledge of what others are doing, and especially how it affects what they are doing. So we didn't feel that that knowledge was there within the department. They also had some limited communication amongst each other. And they didn't, although they were aware of the overall departmental mission, individual objectives and functions, they seem to operate quite independently. There didn't seem, and you'll see in the questions, a good set of the questions is about ways to improve. So generally, you look at an organization and is there some way that they are sharing internally improvements and ways to improve. So generally, you look to your staff that are performing functions on ways to improve their function. And we didn't really see that that was happening. Of course, the staff meetings weren't happening, so there was some lack of communication there, and they weren't really looking as to ways that they could improve not only their function, but the functionality of the department. There was some absence of internal policies, absence of internal training. They were sending people to state trainings, which is very good. But internally, they were not training. And when you're looking to have an organization and making sure that they are all dealing with the same objectives, you would normally see some internal training amongst the department. So part of the policy part that I want to speak to tonight is we, at the same time that we were conducting this audit, there had been a committee formed to look at policies throughout the city. And that consists of CFO Griffin, myself, Director Boudreau, and Council Dory Clark. We had begun already looking at policies. So one of the policies that we saw before we had even started the audit was the mileage reimbursement, and you'll see that noted in the audit report. We've actually come up with a policy for that. We meet again tomorrow, and then we expect to bring that forward to the mayor. That was not something that was just to this department. We had already discovered that we needed to have a policy that handled all of our staff that uses their personal vehicles. I'll let CFO Griffin see if there's anything from here that I've forgotten.
Thank you, Ms. Kleiner. Thank you for allowing us to come before you. Couple of things, leveraging off what Mayor Don just said. We are expected to file a use PAP manual, which is about 4.5 inches thick, 700 pages tomorrow, basically recapping all of the things that went into the revaluation. That's a document that's required by the State Department of Revenue Administration. And how it will go is this: we'll submit it, KRT will bring it to the folks up at DRA in Concord tomorrow. They will have a 4 to 6 week period to review, make any suggestions to KRT, who is the author of that document, and then we will get that document delivered. We had a meeting with the Board of Assessors today, and that document I look at as very critical to us moving forward. In that, I firmly believe that we could have a public-private meeting where KRT would come in and explain, not all 700 pages, of course, but explain their methodology, because a lot of the good questions that have been asked by a lot of different people in this proceeding is things like use of effective year built. That's basically the key ingredient to recapturing depreciation. MLS, use of MLS data, sales data, qualified sales data versus non-qualified. As the mayor indicated, we've got a veteran staff in the assessing department, and they've been trained over the course of time, and they use these tools the way they've been trained. So there's probably an opportunity to leverage off the knowledge of the KRT team and make some changes on the kind of the nuts and bolts of how you calculate assessments. What Ms. Kleiner and I came up with was kind of the notion that on the assessing side, we've kind of offloaded that to the state level. So when I figured out what the training was, it's more keeping up with typical state training, which is getting familiar with code changes, state laws, et cetera. The assumption is that by looking at the, and it's very difficult for me to look at it, but the use PAP manual, not the one I just described, but the one that guides the conduct of assessors, it's quite complicated. So there's an International Association of Assessing Officials that basically sponsor that book, and it's an international book. So I think I'd just like to say that that report that we're anxiously awaiting for, I think that's going to shed a lot of light on how things are conducted. The other thing I recommended, and you'll see it in the recommendations, is we've got kind of a complicated way of describing things to people, whether it's effective year build, cost doesn't equal value, value doesn't equal cost, and also confused a little bit by building permit data, where an individual who pulls a building permit isn't really bound to bring in the work order or the quote from the builder or the contractor. So not sure we've got a tight grip on, not to, I'm not criticizing any departments internally, but I'm not sure that we have a system in place, at least on the assessing side, to basically challenge values that have been put on building permits. And then the other thing is, we're really struggling with the ability to get into a house even when they pull a building permit. But certainly if they don't pull a building permit, we may not know they've ever done anything. So as the mayor indicated, the full measure and list hasn't been done since 1992. That started earlier than that, but great questions this morning. If you can only get into 30% of the houses, is that good enough? And our expert KRT says that's the reality of the business we're in, but it's worthy of a shot to at least update as many cards as we can. These cards, if you think about them, these property cards of almost 28,000 parcels, they've been ebbed and flowed over decades of building permits, revaluations, changes. And as the mayor indicated, one of our team members, through pictometry, we can look with a flyover, we can look to see, at least on the outside, what's been added. And we've done a great job of capturing value in there, whether it be a deck, swimming pool, a filled-in swimming pool to subtract it, et cetera. So I think that's the thoughts that I have with regard to how we move forward. Another touching upon the software, Ms. Kleiner and I brought all the team in, assessors, IT, GIS, et cetera, and we've kind of cobbled together a bunch of disparate software systems. And just to shed some light on that, the admin system was run on what was called the VAX. So if you remember Digital Equipment Corporation, they created the VAX, software ran on it. And remembering that time period, I think it was like everybody's your own programmer. And fortunately, we have one person in the office, in IT, that knows how to program admins. So if you recall, 2 years ago, we went to Munis tax billing. We kept admins as the link between AssessPro and Munis. We need, as Ms. Kleiner says, we need to use the horsepower of AssessPro which was installed in 2005, created in 2000. There's certainly been upgrades, but the Patriot Property president doesn't push us on it. But we have to more effectively use that for abatements, exemptions and credits, things of that nature, because that should be a direct feed through the Munis, to the Munis software, which basically all the software that we have, both Lawson and Munis, there's upload capability through Excel. So we're not saying we're going to be able to feed from admins into Munis, but we can at least eliminate the admins function. And that's where Ms. Klein was talking about dual entry. If we put the abatements in admins, and we put the abatements in Assess Pro, we're constantly trying to make sure and validate that both systems have the same data. So these were kind of the obvious things. But I guess one final point is the Administrative Services Director from my, Mayor did a certain amount of research, but I did some as well. That was really the directorship glue that kept these departments together. And GIS used to be, it is still fully integrated with assessing, but GIS, assessing, IT, those folks have to work together under one directorship would make sense. We have actually a pretty extensive and expansive GIS system, and we're going to expand that over to the Department of Public Works for they'll have their own unique flyover that helps them. But we do have a gentleman from CDM Smith who's an expert in all of these systems, whether it be GIS, assessing, Assess Pro. So that we're expecting that report very soon. So it's kind of with that outlook that we'll be able to take the folks we have, use these reports, as the mayor said, potentially subcontract for the horsepower of the assessing community. And we're optimistic that over a short period of time, we'll really ramp up. But by 2 or 3 years from now, with a full measure and list and the changes that we can make in the creation of assessments, I think will serve us well going forward. It's kind of a reset that probably took place back in 1992, 2005, et cetera. So thank you for your time. I don't know if you have anything more on that, but be free for questions at this point.
Yeah, so I would only add that, I want to go back to something that the mayor pointed out. Our assessing staff was very polite, very patient during this process. And this can be a very difficult process for staff to go through. There's a lot of questions. So imagining everything that you do on a daily basis is being questioned. And you're being asked why you do everything that you're doing. That can be difficult for staff to go through. They were always very professional, always very polite, always very welcoming to us, and I think that speaks to their quality. They were very open and have been, continued to be. Both CFO Griffin and I have been down there almost every day since the audit. We're working with them, we're still asking questions, and they continue to be very helpful. So I want to make sure that that is set forth.
Take questions from the board. Alderman Dowd?
Yes, the question I have is, is the administration asking for any actions taken by the Board of Aldermen this evening or in the near future?
Well, the two things you'll receive, not tonight, but the things you'll receive Tuesday, the 12th, are, of course, the budget, which will include some of these changes. The two principal ones being the creation of a new position and the elimination of another within the budget. Number two, there will be an ordinance proposed. There will be an ordinance that'll come in, which would reestablish the Administrative Services Director position under basically the same. There's a couple minor little word changes, but it's the same language, basically, that existed when the administrative services position for the the decades that it existed, which was removed when the position was eliminated. And so the proposal will be to return that language into the ordinances and restore the position. But to do that, of course, the Board of Aldermen would need to act affirmatively and also would need to act affirmatively on these sections of the budget to implement it from a budgetary standpoint.
Alderman Cleek.
I have a couple of questions. If
That's fine.
okay. Thank you. My first question is going to be about the permits that don't happen within the assessing office. They happen in another department where someone pulls a permit and then it's done. And I remember when I spoke to you, it was basically, I think they told me that it was a click of the button and the information went to you. Would this permits area fall into this new admin services, or will it stay where it is?
So permits is in buildings, which is under community development. Interestingly enough, there is a new software that's being brought into the city for all of our permitting functions. That project is under IT. And it includes a variety of different departments that are working on that project. Buildings would stay with community development. Although I think there needs to be a lot more discussion between IT, assessing, buildings, DPW, on this process as we look forward to implementing the new software. So software implementation sometimes can be difficult. And if you don't have the right people at the table discussing it, and the right divisions giving input, it can go very wrong. It can also go wrong if you don't have proper training after. So if you haven't built enough money into your budget to have the proper training of staff later, then you are going to encounter problems. So, one of the recommendations that you'll see is a lot about training in this audit. That is very important. We want to bring Patriot back in. It's hard to say what type of training our assessing staff went through when we implemented Patriot, but we need to start at the very beginning. So I think you'll see a lot of training when the new permitting system is brought in, and you'll see a lot more integration of ideas and information under the one administrator.
Thank you. I can understand that. I worked as an IT specialist, so I know the implementing and training and people's anxiety of just having to change the way they're doing a system. So I do understand that. I just have two more questions, really. And one is about the bringing up a new system. Who will be responsible for the data transfer from one system to another? Will we be bringing a contractor in, or will our IT department do it? I know when you have different systems and trying to merge, you don't always have the same data fields. So we have to marry those and match them up. Will we be doing that internally, or will there be an external person coming in to do something like that? Sorry.
So I know. So I want to be very clear. This is an audit report which
Right.
gives you a lot of recommendations. This is not an improvement plan.
Okay.
And those issues certainly have to be worked out. And CFO Griffin and I have already started to do some investigation.
Okay.
But you'd want to see an improvement plan that's detailed and brought to you separate from this. And I think that is one question that would need to be answered.
Okay.
Who do we rely on for such, and how much consulting do we need to bring in? Those sort of questions would be answered in the improvement plan.
I had only asked because you had talked about going from that admin system to the munis system and so on. So that was the reason why I asked that one. And I'll make this one my last question. And it goes to the full measure and list. And maybe you can't answer this. Maybe this is more a general question. But if I know we spoke earlier also about the 30%. if the 70% say, no, you're not coming in, and I can tell you, I've gotten calls from constituents that said, no one's coming in my house. What do we do then? How do we do that assessment? Do we know?
Well, New Hampshire law does not
Right.
give us the authority to insist on going in. Attorney Bolton can express a somewhat of a
It was a Supreme Court
qualification
ruling,
of
wasn't it?
that. Under certain circumstances that he can describe, it could happen. But generally speaking, when someone says no, or you can't get them, they're never home, that's the most you can do.
Previously, 12, 15 years ago, the law provided that if a taxpayer refused entry to his or her property, they lost their right to seek an abatement. Legislature, in its infinite wisdom, changed that law, and now there is no disincentive provided to effectively stonewall the municipality. There is a procedure. The instrument that one seeks is called an administrative search warrant. And like other search warrants, it gets issued by a judge. And it has to be based upon reasonable suspicion that that there's something untoward going on, building without a permit, housing code violations, zoning violations, something like that, or that it's part of a extensive program to search out either those sorts of violations or for tax assessment purposes. I question whether that's entirely consistent with the Fourth Amendment, but it's not unreasonable to say you ought to look at the interior structure of property that you're trying to assess for tax purposes. I have no doubt that if we get reports that seem credible, that, hey, I was in my neighbor's house and they've got a finished basement and I don't have a finished basement, and yet my house is assessed for more than their house. We go over, we look at the house from the outside, we see that they've got curtains hanging in the basement windows, which you can detect from the outside. Maybe I could go in and get an administrative search warrant to get us in that house and see if they got a finished basement. Maybe in the course of, and this is a big maybe, in the course of a full measure and list, I can get administrative search warrants more extensively than that. And I'm willing to try, but there's absolutely no guarantee. Now, for those of you in the legislature, if you want to give us some assistance here, that would be welcome. The old system had a degree of fairness to it, that if you weren't going to cooperate, we weren't going to cooperate with you. So, food for thought.
This is the year to do it.
All set, Alderman
I
Clegg?
am. Thank you very much.
Alderman O'Brien.
Yes, thank you. When I glossed over this, I saw a lot of problems, and my previous life on the fire department, after I watched the original Back to the Future, they taught me the admin system, the VAX and everything. And I wonder if we could save some money in selling it to the Smithsonian, but we're probably the only city to still use it. But when you have a choke collar on your dog, he ain't gonna, and such as restraints from upgrading through the tax base and everything, you get into these fall behind situations, and I understand. But to get a canned program to work with this, because I rolled through the Lawson years when that was brought in and everything, and they don't fit tight and this, and it's like buying baggy pants sometimes. But the thing is, with this report, because I know we're going to look at this in the future, and I'm wondering farther down the line, I see that the Smith Company, CDM Smith, is going to report back relatively soon, late March and April. And maybe some of that recommendation would be recommendations on programming, is that correct? And that's going to be affecting perhaps maybe this year's budget in a way, correct?
So we have asked CDM Smith, for lack of a better term, to look under the hood of
Good.
all the systems,
Mhm.
and let us know. And yes, you're correct, Alderman O'Brien. When you have a bunch of canned systems, you buy a lot of canned systems. Quite often, people don't really assess whether they can speak to each other effectively. And that's one of the questions that we have asked them to look at. Can these systems speak to each other? Can they speak to each other effectively? Um, they have let us know in the course of this audit, CFO Griffin and I spoke with Patriot. We had some good discussions, and there are some communities that deal with Patriot, speaking directly to Munis. So there's a lot more work to investigate that and how we make that happen. So there's some positive steps that we found in this process, but I think you're going to see a lot more out of the report from CDM Smith.
Follow up if I may. Because I know a lot of this information has extra purposes too, and I know this is not what we had to discuss tonight. But in looking at this CDM Smith coming in, it goes all the way to police and fire dispatch as well too, on how that comes up in 911 operation when the GIS and everything is working
GIS.
in unison together. So CDM Smith, they're gonna look at the whole city, I kind of hope, to try to come up with something that's gonna be the best that we can afford. Beautiful.
Alderwoman Kelly.
Thank you. My questions are around the full measure and list. I'm interested if we could go over what the goals of that would be and what that would actually uncover or speak to in terms of the things that we have uncovered. And then I have a couple of follow-ups.
Well, maybe I can give a general answer, and then if I'm off in any way, I can be corrected. Well, no one has sought to go into all of the properties since 1991. Now, certainly assessors have gone into properties when there's a building permit or under other circumstances, but no one has sought to go inside all of the properties since 1992. And what this would do is just potentially, where assessors gained entrance, give them the opportunity to discover things which were maybe not correctly characterized or captured in the property records, but also would give them the opportunity, and if they couldn't get in, they'd have to do this from the exterior, to characterize the quality of the property, the condition of the property, as either good, very good, and there's a scale that they use. So it would help with that. I mean, one thing that hasn't been mentioned, and maybe Ms. Klein or Ms. Griffin can get into it in more detail, but one problem that has been identified as all this discussion has gone on is that the effective year built is a very confusing factor. And when the assessor before Mr. Duhamel was in office for quite some time, he created as we've been told, a very complicated kind of jury-rigged, I don't mean that too negatively, but system that kind of only he really understood. Mr. Duhamel then just kind of adopted that and just went forward with it. But the idea would be to reduce, there would still be an effective year built, but to reduce its importance and simply rely principally on the condition of the property as characterized by an inspection, and to make rather than have the condition rely on the effective year built, do the reverse. And they can explain this in more detail. But what would be accomplished is our agents, the assessors, we'd have to hire an outside firm to do this, would be able to view the internals of maybe 30% of the houses.
Follow-up? The one that you presided over in 1992, was that done externally as well or internally?
Yes. And it was even, when a full measure and list is done, it's not just residential, it's commercial as well. But the technology, that cost $1.5 million in
1992.
what is that, almost 40 years ago? No, 30 years ago, or 28 or 27 years ago, or whatever it is. That cost $1.5 million in 1990 or $1991. The technology has improved so that the cost is lower. They use like lasers and stuff like this. They can measure from the outside the dimensions of things without actually going in, especially on commercial buildings. So the relative cost is actually a little lower, but it's still, $1.3 million, $1.4 million, $1.5 million.
Anyone else? Alderman Jettie.
Thank you. I have several, if you don't mind.
Fine.
I looked at the charter and the ordinances, and they don't say a whole lot about assessing, and the state law doesn't seem to say a whole lot about it either. Maybe I'm missing something, but the charter just says that the mayor, with consent of the aldermen, shall appoint 3 assessors and a treasurer and collector of taxes. And it says that each assessor shall, prior to his appointment, have demonstrated knowledge of property appraisal or assessment and of the laws governing the assessment and collection of property taxes. When I look at your organizational chart, I don't see the Board of Assessors listed at all. And I'm wondering what is their function, and do the people that we have there, do they meet this qualification? Or aren't they supposed to be in charge of this department? And where do they fit into this scheme of assessing and collecting property taxes?
I can help with that. The Board of Assessors has supervisory authority over the department, but it's the Board of Aldermen that can determine what the staff is going to be, and that's in the charter. And there's a separate section of the charter from the section 42 that you were looking at, Attorney Jettie, which talks more about the Board of Assessors and the assistants that can be hired by the Board of Aldermen to assist them in producing the assessment. There are ordinances that further define that, and also define that, as we sit here, that assessing is part of the Financial Services Division and reports currently to the CFO. Obviously, the idea of reinstituting the Administrative Services Division, if the board chooses to go that route, will change that. But for the day-to-day administrative functions, there's a hierarchy. The ultimate decision on what property values are assessed each year, and the decision as to whether to grant or deny applications for abatement, is made by the Board of Assessors. The 3 current members of the Board of Assessors, the chairman has about 50 years' experience in the assessing field. He was formerly the professional assessor in Merrimack. Prior to that, he worked for a mass appraisal firm, Colair Trumbull, for many years. Another one of the members is a real estate broker, and accordingly has knowledge in the real estate field and values of property. And the third member has prior experience managing properties. both, I believe, commercial and residential properties, and has experience in the real estate field in that way. So I think they all meet those general qualifications.
So could I follow? Sure. So it sounds like they probably do, but so are they, on the organizational chart, why aren't they somewhere? Why aren't they at the top?
I,
Why?
I didn't do the organizational chart, and they
I know
probably
you didn't. I didn't.
could have been listed. They don't have the authority to hire and fire, for example, but they have the authority to overrule the recommendations of the staff. Uh, I think they do so advisedly when they do, but they are not merely a rubber stamp either. They work with the professional staff to arrive at proper assessments and proper decisions on abatement requests.
So I'll answer as to why they weren't in the organizational chart. We did not look, although we looked at information that was being fed from our internal department to the Board of Assessors. When I talked about looking at their board packets and the way that abatements were written up and presented and that sort of thing, we did not include them in the management audit as we did not interview them. We were looking at our internal staff, our internal department and how it functions. Certainly that could have been looked at, but it was not in the scope of our audit to review the Board of Assessors.
Alderman Jettie.
So when we look at hiring an administrative services director and giving that director the job of overseeing the assessing department, I'm wondering if we shouldn't look, take a broader look at where the Board of Assessors fits in here. Shouldn't they be supervising the department and the administrative services director? Is the administrative services director going to be able to, is one person, with all the other stuff I hear you talking about the administrative services director being assigned, shouldn't we have a chief assessor, under the Board of Assessors? I don't know the answer. I'm just raising the questions. And whether or not and what about the city treasurer and tax collector? Where does he fit into this?
City treasurer and tax collector receives a warrant every year from the Board of Assessors, and that warrant essentially lists all of the properties and sets a value on all of the properties. A form called the MS-1 is transmitted to the State Department of Revenue Administration, and very simply, the state looks at what the city needs, what its budget is, what it's going to have to pay as its share of the county budget, county expenses, subtracts revenue from other sources, and then says, okay, we've got to get so much from the property tax. Does the division, the amount of taxable, the value of the taxable property divided by divided into what you need to raise. They transmit that tax rate that they've calculated to the treasurer and tax collector. The tax collector then sends out the bills, multiplying the assessed value times the property tax rate. And as the money comes in, the treasurer has superintendents over that money, invests it wisely, we hope, And when it's needed to pay bills, it's there.
I have another,
Alderman Jettie?
and so talking about the full measure and list, I think it's, personally, I think it's very important that everyone in the city feel that they're being treated fairly, that their taxes are fair compared to everybody else, their share is fair. And I think a key element of that is that that their property is being appropriately assessed and it's fair compared to everybody else. And I think, doing, part of that is, keeping up with the assessment, doing a full, evaluation where you do look at the properties in detail, and you're not just doing a statistical analysis like we just did. So we've got, we're going to have to do another revaluation in 5 years. I know other cities, do this constantly. They don't, if you wait 5 years and then you try to do everything at once, I think it's a much major project and probably more expensive if we just, if we kept up with it, if we did like, every year we did a fifth of the city. And so that, we'd be keeping up, and I don't know if that could be done internally or not. I don't know what the cost would be compared, if we did it, if we hired sufficient staff to do this on an ongoing basis, whether that would be cheaper than hiring someone to come in and do it all at once, or hiring somebody to do it every year, part of it every year. But that's something I think we ought to look at. And when you mentioned, building permits not being the most reliable information because people lowball what their improvement is, that we don't require, verification by the contractor as to, what it costs and everything. I'm thinking, why don't we do that? And if it's because the ordinance or our ordinances don't require it, maybe we need to change the, maybe you should suggest legislation to us that we should adopt so that we can verify that information. I just want to avoid, the honest guy, hiring a contractor and being, full up straight with, getting the proper building permits. This is exactly what it's going to cost, allowing people to go in and do the inspections. He ends up, his property ends up being valued at its full value. Some other person, his neighbor, for example, lowballs what the improvements he's making, maybe doesn't even let the inspector come in and look at it. And so you end up with false information, and that neighbor doesn't get, his property doesn't get assessed properly. And so his neighbor is paying more in taxes than he is, and that's unfair. And I think we ought to do whatever we can to avoid that situation.
Well, we certainly should. And it may be appropriate to get more information at the time someone gets a building permit about what the cost of the construction will be. But the cost of the construction is not, in most cases, going to be equal to an increased value of the property. Most of the time, it will be different. Might cost $10,000 for someone to redo the bathroom in their home, but that may not add $10,000 to the value of the house. The house may or may not increase in value at all. It may increase by only $5,000 rather than $10,000. A more extensive renovation that adds an additional room and a second or third bathroom to the house might cost $80,000 to construct, but only add $30,000 to the value. So between the expertise of the assessor looking at it and charts and tables that can be used as a reference, that assessor has got to use judgment in determining what value is added by any construction project. And before I forget, because I meant to say this later, when people don't get a building permit, yeah, it's bad. And the assessments may be wrong because someone's got the finished basement that is not getting taxed. Worse than that is it hasn't been inspected by the building department. We've got an electrical inspector. We've got a mechanical inspector that would inspect any extensions of the gas heat. We've got framing and structure inspectors that guarantee that whatever is built is structurally sound and won't fall down. Won't fall down and shear off the gas line and the electric wiring and what all that was just installed. That is every bit as important, perhaps more important, than getting the tax assessment right. I mean, if we have fires and unsafe structures and so forth, that is truly life endangering, and ought to be corrected. So that's an additional benefit that can sometimes be realized by doing the full measure and list and discovering these problems.
Mayor Donches?
I had a few thoughts in response, answered additional information or whatever. The Board of Assessors, of course, they're volunteers, so it's hard to expect them to be in there every day. Then they have jobs or they're retired. Yeah, the chair is retired, but the other ones have jobs. But also, serving in the way that they do, I think they provide an independent oversight in the sense that, sure, an appraiser goes in and makes an assessment of what a property is worth. Then the homeowner disagrees. And where do you go with that disagreement? Now, you could go back to the staff, but the staff has already made a determination, and they may think they're right, and they don't change it. What the Board of Assessors is they come in from the outside, and they listen to the abatements or consider the abatement requests and take an independent view. So it gives a local appeal, so you don't have to go to Superior Court, at least one level of appeal. You don't have to go to Superior Court, to the Board of Land and Tax Appeals. You can just go down there to 208, and at least somebody's going to come in and review the case if you, the homeowner, think that there's an error. So they do provide that function, although they don't oversee the everyday work. Yes, we might want to do more frequent assessments, but if we do this full measure and list over 3 years, which is about as quickly as it can get done, that would enable us to undertake a new revaluation in 3 years if we want to. But it does take time to do that inspection because you got to put a lot of people out in the field. It is an expensive exercise, but it does help to achieve equity and certainly a better perception of equity. So I think the idea of possibly doing this more often is something we want to consider. Even though every time we do it, there are unhappy people. Although this was, point 3, even though this was a statistical revaluation, it wasn't just working with numbers. They did go out and visually inspect from the outside every property. So there at least was that. It wasn't just down in the office, well, let's change this number by such and such. They looked at all the properties. Now, they didn't go in, they didn't seek to go actually in, but they looked at every property to try to judge its condition, to make sure that it's its dimensions were properly captured, and they did find things that they saw things like in some cases a house might be dimensionally higher than was reflected in the records, and when they found something like that, they corrected it, or maybe other external features that they were able to observe. So that was the way they went about it. So it wasn't just a numbers approach. And number three, the building permits, at least in my take on the situation, they are a tool, but a very inexact one, because you only need a building. I mean, you only need a building permit if you're going to do certain things. Electrical, any change to electrical, any change to plumbing, or to a bearing wall, you need a building permit. But you do a building permit on your electrical, you may not increase the value at all. If you fix the old rod and tube, which I've done, and you replace it with something more modern in parts of the house, no one pays more because of that. On the other hand, you can do projects that increase value considerably without a building permit. So validly. So let's say you go into the kitchen and you do not alter electrical, plumbing, or any bearing wall. You can change a wall, but if you don't have a bearing wall, you don't need a building permit. And you put in new cabinets, you put in the best appliances, you put in granite countertops and all this stuff, that may not require a building permit if you're not making certain electrical and plumbing changes. So the building permit helps. It helps to give the assessors notice that there might be changes in value that they should examine, and to the extent that hasn't been done in the past, that will be done in the future. From here on in we're not sure. We think it's mostly been done, but it will be done from now on. But it doesn't, it's still a tool, but it doesn't provide all the answers, and it doesn't capture all value. Sometimes it can miss substantial increases, but on the other hand, a building permit that requires some considerable expenditure might, on the other hand, not increase value that much. But it does alert them that they should go in and at least look at the situation, see what's there. And if that is inaccurate, one of these other experts can correct me.
Alderman Jettie, you had a follow-up?
I just have one last, Attorney Bolton, when you talk about people refusing entry and allowing inspection, you talked about perhaps our legislators could amend the state law to give you more authority to do that, and I would suggest that if that's something you want, that I'm sure they're more than willing to help you do that if you provide them with what you want. But I always thought that the remedy to that is that if the assessor was refused entry, he could assume that you've got the Taj Mahal in there behind those closed doors, and then when you get your assessment and you find out you think you're being overly assessed, you could then request an abatement, and then the burden of proof is on you to show that it was not assessed properly. Doesn't that work anymore?
Well, that was a method that used to be used, but now people who work as assessors in communities have to be certified by an agency that's part of the Department of Revenue Administration. It's called the Assessing Standards Board. And if they start making things up just because they didn't get into a property, a complaint can be filed against them, and they can lose that certification and therefore lose their job. So assuming without any proof that there's a finished basement, or guessing at the number of bathrooms or bedrooms or anything else without reason, is not something that professional assessors are well advised to do.
So your answer is you do need legislation to give you more authority.
Well, as I say, in the past, there was a disincentive to a taxpayer to refuse entry, and that disincentive was removed. Now, if any of the legislators from Nashua or elsewhere in the state want to just give us blanket authority to enter any premises, it'll make the assessing function easier. I think there'll be some opposition to that, but perhaps a compromise could be arrived at.
We'd be happy to, except for that little document called the Constitution, but we'll have to look at that, you know.
Alderwoman Kelly.
So I think that the responsibilities of the chief assessor are pretty well outlined in the report. And my question is around what the new role, the administrative service director will do and what the differences are, because we don't have a responsibility outline for that yet.
Ms. Kleiner?
So, sure. So one of the reasons that we were looking at the Administrative Services Director is the job description that it had in the past was more extensive than just your chief assessor. So it was really responsible in one of the things that we feel from the audit didn't show, and that is the communication between the departments, or now they're called divisions, um, to ensure that the processes that they're putting in and the systems that they're putting in, that there's proper input and communication amongst those. So that's what the Administrative Services Director, when you look back in the history that Mayor Donchess spoke about, you see how there was much more internal communication and buy-in of all the departments into whatever the function was being evaluated or implemented. That would be more of that level. We do know that right now, without a chief assessor, someone is going to have to get in there and create an improvement plan and a way to move this department forward. It's something that CFL Griffin and I have just started, just as Mayor Donchess has asked us to kind of continue with this process. We had our first staff meeting with them, and the mayor attended on Tuesday. There has to be a lot more oversight without the chief assessor by the Administrative Services Director, certainly, to begin with.
Thank you. That was informative. My question as a follow-up is, when you're looking for this new person, what kind of background are you looking for? Are you looking for someone who would be heavily an assessor or heavily in IT? There's a lot of different departments that we're talking about overseeing. So what does that look like?
So I think Mayor Donchess spoke to it best. You're not looking for someone that has a lot of specific knowledge about every particular department. You're not going to find that, or if you do, take that person. You're looking for someone that has solid management skills. You're looking for someone with a business background. I think your past administrative services directors had accounting backgrounds. The assessing, I mean, you can attend training and you can get certain knowledge. You can rely on consultants and professionals with expertise. Will that person know where to get that information? That's important. But you're not going to, I doubt very much you're going to find one individual who's an assessor, worked in IT, been a purchaser, dealt with insurance, and been a city clerk. If you do, that's not the strength of the position. the strength of the position is to be able to manage functions efficiently.
Alderwoman Clee?
But I'm not sure if my comments here are questions as much as comments. Going back to the permits, and I know this does not fall under the assessors, but for transition and to help. And I also know that if someone pulls a $25,000 permit, it may really only bring up the assessment by $5,000. So, and I understand that that's a situation, but when a permit is pulled and an inspection is done, because I did go up there and I did talk to them many months ago about how they do this, and they say when a permit is pulled, depending upon the permit, sometimes they have to go in at incremental times to make sure certain things are done. And then finally do a final inspection and sign off on that permit, and that's when it would get transmitted to the assessors. But when that happens, and this may be to you, Attorney Bolton, but when that's done, would it be legal or appropriate for pictures to be taken, for this information to be, the visual, the kind of the inspection that they do, to be sent on to the assessor's office to help them in the assessment? I know that this person's not an assessor, so they can't say the value is up by this, but if they could give that information, I mean, and that's why I said this is more of maybe a comment and an idea. And following up on that, at the time, and again, I don't know about the legality of this, at the time of a sale, oftentimes open houses are done. Would we legally be able to go in at that time and kind of do a unofficial assessment of the property?
I know of no prohibition no law that would prohibit any of our building inspectors from taking photographs. And certainly if there's an open house, I guess it means it's an open house, so anyone can go in. I mean, as presently constituted, our assessors work Monday through Friday schedule. Most of the open houses take place on weekends, maybe some in the evenings, but obviously they work regular daytime schedules. Now, over time, other things can happen, schedules can be changed, better ways to do things can be worked out. It might not be impossible to have an assessor accompany the building inspector for that final inspection and make it more convenient for the homeowner to have to make that arrangement only once rather than twice. So all of those things are certainly possible.
And I guess my last part of that is, I know when my house was on the market, one of the things that a lot of real estate agents like to do are these videos that literally showed. Granted, they used a wide lens, and my oven looked like it would fit a body in it, but but this would still give you an idea as to how many bedrooms, what the process. We can use all those tools.
Yeah,
when we're not allowed into a home, is what I'm kind of trying to think.
if you've got a home that's being marketed for sale or one that's recently sold, much information can be gathered. The assessing department subscribes to the multiple listing service. So they're able, when a home has been listed on the service, they're able to access the pictures that have been posted, and if there are links to videos or other things on there, very often there are flowery descriptions that paint the home in the best possible light. They can get information there, and by a simple calculation, when the deed comes through, you can calculate from the tax stamps what the sale price is. And there are other documents that are filed with the DRA that we can get access to learn the sales price. That can give you an idea as to whether your data is correct or not. You are not supposed to, and there are reasons because of the way it affects the calculation of the equalization ratio. You're not supposed to blindly just raise the assessment to match the sales price, and that's true even if you then equalize it. But it can be an indication that what you had down in your data as a place with 1.5 baths turns out to have 3 baths. What you thought was a 3-bedroom home turns out to be a 4-bedroom home. That sort of correction to the data on a piece of property is definitely possible when a house is listed for sale.
The reason I'm bringing this up is perhaps that would be a good position to have, rather than having an assessor have to do it, but having someone that was more or less kind of their full-time job. And I don't mean to add cost or that, but I think that it'd be a valuable tool for people to be able to use. And I understand that we can't do, because someone could sell a $700,000 home for 250,000 because they're selling it to a family member. And so I understand it goes both directions. So we don't follow the price in that respect, but I was just thinking more of the descriptive nature of it.
They go through a check on that as well.
Yeah.
It's what they call qualifying a sale.
Right.
And one method of valuing property is to compare it to other properties and make adjustments to the properties you're comparing it to try and arrive at a value that's based upon what the market is doing. Well, if you have suspicions that a sale is not truly based upon the market because it was what they call not being at arm's length. And now that would mean, as you pointed out, someone selling to a relative or something, so a lower price. Seller financing sometimes increases the price. So if there's seller financing involved, you'd probably disqualify that as being as a comparable. So these kinds of other things you mentioned enter into the picture too. So for every property that is sold, an assessment, a judgment is made as to whether it's a bona fide arm's length transaction and therefore a qualified sale.
Thank you very much.
Alderman Tenza.
Thank you. Thank you for including the descriptions of what the assessing department, what each employee does in the assessing department. I was kind of taken back at how much each person is responsible for. Did you make any opinions throughout this audit on whether the assessing department is adequately staffed, especially on the assessing side or even on the administrative side?
Well, we did. So first, one of the things that was noted is those job descriptions, and we gave you the job descriptions that are currently held by HR for those positions. We did realize that those need to be reviewed and restructured and rewritten to provide more oversight on what the positions are actually doing now. So it lists an appraiser in there. We have assessors. But during the interviews, it was the opinion of several staff that we needed what they call a full measure and lister, which is not an assessor, but that is the person that goes out and reviews and looks around and does measurements on houses. That is something that we've had in the past that we do not have now. I think as we look for an improvement plan, we'll certainly have to look at the staffing levels and are they adequate? But more further investigation would be needed on that.
Could I just make a couple of follow-up comments? Not really a question, but first, just to say we've lost a number of these positions for reasons over the years, and even not doing the full measure and list. Every time we do a full measure and list, we take away positions from other parts of city government. And $1 million and a half dollars could be, how many teachers or policemen and firefighters that we're not funding for that year as well. So I think that's something that we all have to consider here. on the board as we go forward. And then I know this is probably not going to happen anytime soon, but I would hope that, and it's probably an executive function of the mayor's office, that if it is a policy, or if at some point the policy of the city is that we're going to go and seek administrative warrants to go into people's houses, I would hope that would be a broader discussion. I, for one, would be very much against that unless it's a worst-case scenario. Thank you.
So you don't want me to tell you about the ones I've already done?
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, just as a Realtor, the MLS presumably has good data because Realtors check tax maps and go into City Hall and town halls and check the data. So the data's pretty good. I wouldn't go by the write-ups because there are a lot of English majors that are also Realtors that are trying to make it sound like Taj Mahal. And the pictures, they always take a ton of pictures and use the best ones, but it would give you, the MLS would give you the exact measurements. I mean, today Realtors use laser to do measurements, so they're pretty accurate to within less than an inch. So it's a piece of information that if the assessing department wanted to, could, at the time of sale, take the MLS sheet, put it in the file. The MLS also lists the former sales prices and year built and all these other pieces of information that would assist an evaluation to some degree. I wouldn't rely 100% on it, but it gives you pretty good start, especially if they're not letting you in the house.
Anything else before we open up our public comment? Okay. I'm going to open up for public comment. If you'd like to come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record. The first person signed up is Michael Ortolano.
Michael Ortolano, 41 Berkeley Street. I just wanted to take a few minutes to address the mayor's opening comments, which confused me. The meeting this morning that I sat in through in part of the assessors board handed out information regarding the number of abatements filed this year, and the numbers are significant. There's 376 abatements, not the 200 that were mentioned during your opening comments. That's 44% higher than the last update year in 2013, and it's almost 20% higher than the previous update in 2009. So I was confused by the statement because it seemed to be positioning the issue as less of a significant issue than I think the numbers would reflect. And you know, a big part of this issue is the integrity of the numbers. You know, the numbers are one, as you look deeper at it, you know, there seems to be arbitrary methodologies that are used, and I think that's pretty much flushed out in the management audit that was done, that the procedures and policies aren't really in place to support having a strong level of confidence that the assessments are equitable and the quality of the work product is good. So I just wanted to highlight that. I wanted to highlight to this organization that a lot of it's about the numbers. I feel like you know, there are lots of generalizations that are made with regard to the assessing department, and I do hope that the next wave of this gets to look more closely at the work product to make sure that it's converging on what should be a methodology that can be transparent, can be displayed to the community. In an ideal scenario, a taxpayer that has the interest and the time should be able to, you know, use the same method that the assessors are using to arrive at the same conclusion. So that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael O'Connor.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Michael O'Connor. I'm at 42 Berkeley Street. So this morning, I also attended the Board of Assessors meeting, and I had one simple question which led to a follow-on, but it was basically about the two major findings, which are the ineffective management of the assessing department and the lack of internal procedures. And I asked a question about who was accountable. I was actually glad to hear the Alderman bring up the, I think it's section 42 in the charter, because when I read that, and that was one of the reasons for my question, it was hard to understand who was responsible for this. The board, gave a direct answer to the first one, was the chief assessor. But then the follow-on question I had, well, then who's accountable for the oversight? And there it got a little more murky, and correct me if I'm wrong, the attorney, the CFO, and Ms. Kleiner were there. But I think they clearly weren't, and so I think that partially answers the question. There didn't seem to be any sense of accountability on their part, and they said the CFO would have been the person that they felt was accountable. And then there was some vague comment there I didn't quite follow about. There was some small supervisory responsibility of the state. I think this issue of accountability, I'm not just a crank about it, or I guess I am a little bit of a crank about it, but it's really important. Without, all organizations have some way of dealing with this accountability, whether you're the fire department, the police department, I mentioned the Navy. We all know how, when you're held to account for when things go wrong in the night. Here's things went wrong, I think it's fair to say, even if you're, reading between the lines. There was ineffective management, and it persisted for quite a long time. So who was aware of that? And I guess the answer was, well, maybe the CFO. But then, and I was really, actually, it made, because I was sort of put in my place this morning because from the attorney, he was saying, well, these are personnel matters. And I'm not trying to get into your personnel matters. I'm trying to really understand your organizational chart and who should feel responsible and accountable for what went wrong. And because this wasn't a one rogue employee that over a space of a week and no one, somebody finally said, oh, hey, this has been persistent conduct for a while. And before there needs to be trust as you move forward to make it right now. So what I'm hearing is the CFO, and this is not meant to be personal. I'm sure he's a fine fellow. He does a great job, and I heard all the great work he does in finances. And the answer I heard tonight sort of makes sense. It was the answer that might have been reasonable this morning, except I guess I was prying into personnel matters. But the answer is the man didn't have enough time to do his job. But here we are, we're moving forward now, okay? And we're supposed to trust that the people who are going to make this right are the same people who don't have time. The CFO didn't have time to oversee the management issues in the office that he's responsible for, but now he has time to fix it. I don't know, I think it's going to really be hard to gain trust in that position. The second thing that I wanted to bring up was something that I heard this morning, and it keeps coming up, and it's about the assessing department. And there seems to be this conflation between the customer service part of the assessing department and the output of the assessment department, which is fair and equitable assessments. Having had to become more familiar with what goes on in assessing and having gone down there a number of times since the fall or since last summer when the letters arrived, I can tell you anecdotally from my perspective, the customer service people are great. They're wonderful. And today I hear the chair of the Board of Assessors, seems like a nice fellow, but he's saying, but aren't the people really nice down there, sort of? It's sort of, that's, hey, aren't we all happy? It's as if you were going to some place to get surgery and the surgeon was incompetent, but you had some, nice treatment up front, and that's all well and good. So I just don't understand this obsession with trying to say, yeah, hey, they got great customer service, they're great people, they're great, underpaid public servants. Yeah, no one's disputing that. What we're disputing is, are we arriving at fair and equitable assessments that people have confidence in? The last thing I wanted to say, well, actually, two more things, I'm sorry. One is there is, and I hear we have a Realtor here, and I know it's very controversial, but there's automated valuation methods that industry is exploring. It may be a little too cutting edge for the city, but, people are looking at ways that they don't, I mean, you're not the only, or our assessors aren't the only people who can't get in houses, but, other people in industry for property evaluation can't get in there either. But they somehow figure how to make automated methods that are reasonably accurate. And I think if it was any more, if it was any more accurate than what we're seeing today, that would be a step forward. And lastly, the last thing, and this was brought up by Ms. Kleiner, and I think it was a very good point, was seeking customer input, where the customer, I think you were referring to us, the citizens, right? And what I would just suggest to you in a respectful manner, one thing besides figuring out how to send out surveys to people is maybe to be reasonably accept input from concerned citizens. There may only be a few, and I think that it's very notable, I don't even have to mention names, of people who have put in a lot of work and a lot of effort and have been really treated, I think, disrespectfully in a lot of respects, because they're bringing a message nobody wants to hear. Yes, everyone's happy with the customer service down there. We're asking about the assessments. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori Ortolano?
Lori Ortolano, 41 Berkeley Street. Before I start, and maybe we can't do this, but there's a lady here who it's her first time at the meeting, and she just whispered to me she'd like to talk, but she didn't sign up on the sheet, so I don't know if you can accommodate her, but I just wanted to say that before I end it. I'd like to address the mayor's comments first. I know you believe very strongly that the KRT numbers and this reevaluation we just did produced equitable assessments. I really am pretty opposite you on this issue. I feel we have a lot of inequity in the city and that KRT's work fell very short, really because the data that they used was not that good. And I can tell you from my perspective, living in an old neighborhood, I think the old neighborhoods are particularly bad. And we have a lot of old neighborhoods around Nashua. And I think there's a lot of disparity in equity. And I think there's a lot of people living in some of those homes that don't even understand the disparity that is there. So I don't like the idea of waiting 5 years. I think it's too long. I'm not even certain how well your ratio or your median ratio is going to hold over that time to give you the 5 years to take that time, especially if the real estate market keeps cruising along with some forward motion. So that's one thing. Secondly, I've been at the last 2 Board of Assessors meetings, and I have to be honest, they were pretty darn disappointing. It's really tough for me sitting there. The meeting I went to 2 weeks ago had a little bit of a show going on for me because at that point, the number of abatements filed had been just over 100. And so the chair and the ex-chief were commenting on how satisfied the public is. We've only got about 100 abatements in, and wow, Lori, that's a real good indicator that everyone's very happy. Everything's good. People are not upset at all. What are you talking about? And I wasn't on the agenda, so I couldn't speak to that, but I walked out really disappointed. I talked to some industry experts who said to me, that's not an indication of satisfaction at all and should not be used. A low number of abatements can actually mean that you're pretty undervalued in your city, which I agreed with that. But now a week goes by, and the abatements jump almost to 400. So this week we go into the Board of Assessors, and they're no longer saying, oh, wow, we hardly have any abatements, everything's fine. But what they are saying is, well, let's conduct a poll. And the chair is saying, well, you know what? Kim and John asked about, the community, and has there been many complaints in their survey? And their survey came up with, people seem pretty happy. Overall, people seem pretty happy with the office. I agree with that. I've been down there a lot. Your front-end interface is outstanding. The 3 women at the front are outstanding. They do a wonderful job. Every one of them is professional, courteous, makes you feel welcomed. But that's not an indication that the assessments are good and what's going on behind the wall. And so for the chair to sit there today and say, well, you know what? We're not hearing any complaints. Everyone's pretty happy. That's a pretty good indication. We don't have a problem. I have to sort of endure that for round 2. And I think we're missing the point. So I know Mr. Bolton highlighted the experience of our Board of Assessors. I have some serious reservations about what's going on in there. I really do. I am so glad you brought up the charter. The Board of Assessors does not seem to know where they fit in that charter. One of their mission responsibilities in the website is to review all policy and make certain all policies implemented. When I saw them 3 months ago, I came with their mission statement and I read to them. Your job is to implement policy, review policy, make certain it's happening. And at that point, they looked at the chief and said, do we have any policies? And he kind of shrugged and went, I don't know. We're looking into that. And then we started talking about the need for a policy on how to judge and grade fixtures. That was in November. I have been very patient. I've sat back very quietly for 4 months and said nothing about this because I've been watching. Where is that policy? And that's a pretty simple policy to outline just to establish some standards among all the assessors. So November goes by, and here we are, March, and I know our chief left, but through this entire time frame, no policy ever came forward, no first read to the Board of Assessors, no second read to the Board of Assessors, no asking by the Board of Assessors, hey, where's the policy on this? They don't seem to even understand that they need to be calling out for that. So I have some serious reservations, and when I go to those meetings, I usually come out of it with a pretty good headache. And there's a lot of work to do because I don't think they understand what their role is. And the chair, he's the one who pushed me to the state, to the commissioner, Lindsay Stepp. And when I called the commissioner and got her on the phone, she was like, well, wait a minute, you have a problem with your chief coming to work. That really doesn't fall on my plate. That's on your plate. You pay the guy. There's some stuff you're supposed to be doing. And my Board of Assessors like, no, that's not on us. We're not covering that. Go up to the state. And so right now, even between the state and the Board of Assessors, I'm not certain what our role is. But I can tell you that our board doesn't feel like they're tied to this position at all. And I think they're missing something here. With regard to the position and the elimination of the chief, I have a major concern. And Mayor Donchis, you mentioned that we have somebody within now in a supervisory capacity. I was more or less assured by you today, Kim, that we were not promoting anyone from within. Nothing was being established that way. I hope that's true because I have serious reservations given the report about taking staff within and promoting anyone because there's a total lack of training. And one of your commercial assessors has only been doing commercial for 2 years. One of your residential has only been doing residential for 2 years. For those people, you've had a massive lack of oversight for the 3.5 years that the chief has been there. So they're not well trained in my book at all with oversight and work. And then you've got the whole communication problem internally. And then you've got massive standards issues among the assessors that have experience in general. So I get pretty distraught to think that we have somebody capable within of promoting. I also share the same concerns Mr. O'Connor expressed. We haven't had the time, the CFO, even you, Kim, have pretty busy jobs, all-encompassing jobs. To now be down in that assessing office defining the direction and what needs to be done concerns me. I feel we need an assessing expert. Not for nothing, but they're not assessing experts. And the fact that we're eliminating the chief, Angelo Marino was a chief, was a GIS director, and I think at one point a part-time IT guy. And he sat in the assessing office and he wore all 3 hats. And when the IT piece kind of disappeared, he wore 2 hats. And, so I don't know where this person is going to sit, but I think, and Angelo was here from 1996 until he left in 2016. and then you brought in John, so you had the better part of 23 years, you've had a chief. It's a recognized position in the state. So the concept that Donna Lee got rid of the director position, we still had a chief. We've had a chief for a long time, so I really question, and the city has grown, and the parcels of land have grown, and the number of properties have grown. Can we really run without one? Do we really not need one? So I hope you think a little bit about that, because that is a reservation I have. And I think you need to bring in help now to figure out how you're going to define how that group operates in a true assessing form. Now, I don't think we're talking enough about some of the issues. The software stuff is great, you're nailing that, you're on the right page, I think. And I think we can't forget that all of this software stuff has to generate an interface for the public to be able to access what we'd like to access. Please don't forget about us. Property cards, MLS stuff, sales searches so we can do better abatements. But your assessors, when we talk about permits, you know, the bottom line, I think we're missing a good number of permits. We're just missing them, we don't go. Okay, so that's a problem. MLS adjusting, you know, we're missing a bunch of homes on MLS adjusting. I don't care if you put a little 8 in the column. The 8's there and you flip the card over and nothing's written. And it may be that there was nothing to change, but there should be something there. And I can tell you, when I look at the MLS pictures, I go, ooh, we should have changed stuff. So it doesn't look like, it just looks like we threw an 8 in the column and never really looked at the pictures. So, you know, and how we use those pictures, you know that I have a serious reservation about the sales chasing issue. And I think we have been doing that type of assessing strongly on sold properties, that we have quantitative and we have qualitative data we can look at, and we're being way too hard on that qualitative data. And we're changing those sold properties more aggressively than we are on permitted work, and we're not even doing it to all sold properties. We're doing it to select. And, you know, that's not acceptable to me. Now, right now, my observation is they're not MLS correcting houses at all. There's quite a slew of them that have been sold since November that all have needs review in the column. And they're not using the pictures, they're not doing anything. I don't know if they're gun shy, I don't know if they're holding back, but some of them, I'll give you an example, are homes that in the past they would correct, that I think they gotta sit there and not correct. They have a home that's totally rebuilt, remodeled, permits pulled, addition put on, gutted. They go in April, and they go in with a clean card and they reassess the whole property. It's all redone, which is what they had to do. It's like a new build. They reassess it, they do it just fine. They do their work the way they're supposed to. I go down, I can see it. It's perfect, it's stapled. They come up with an assessment for this property, $470,000. Then 6 weeks later, it goes on the market. It's stayed on the market and it's sold in December. Okay, what does it sell for? $560. All right, the assessment and the price are off. Now it's got a needs review stamp on it. It's had a needs review for 3 months. In my opinion, you don't touch that. You're done. You looked at that property. You ran your model. Your model produced a valuation. That's how your model works. What it tells me is your model isn't very good because your permit tables haven't been updated, because your square footage build for new construction isn't that good, or additions. But that's what your model is. So if you go to that house now, based on the sale price, and you say, oh, the year 2000 build I put on that old house, I'm going to make it 2010 now. And I'm going to change the 3 bathrooms to excellent from good. And I'm going to change the kitchen to excellent. And I can drive up another 40 or 50 grand out of that. You're only doing that because of the sales price. Stop. To me, you did the best you could because that's what your model showed. And that's what, because if that house hadn't sold and that house had somebody living in it and they had walked in and done that card, that would be the assessment. That would really be the assessment for the person living there. So you have to be careful how you use the sales data. And we need a lot of retraining on that. I think that's very, very important. So I know there's more in my head, but I'm tired and I think you are too. So I'm going to stop here, and I appreciate the work that's been done. I really do. But I don't want to lose sight of some of the important stuff going on there when we're creating valuation. Thank you.
Thank you. You can speak. Name and address for the record, please.
My name is Laura Cahoon. I live at 30 Greenwood Drive in Nashua. I'm going to preface it by saying I'm not a public speaker. However, I do want to say I thank you very much for explaining the permits. I now realize how Nashua failed me. I moved in here, and I'm doing an abatement, but that's beside the point. But I had a gas leak for 4 years and called in 3 plumbers. They couldn't find it. Finally had the utility company come in, and they realized it was a cracked pipe underneath the water heater. Not happy about that. I will say that, number one, I appreciate the fact that you said that people in the assessing department have been very patient. But I think you people also have to realize that Nashua residents have been very patient. I've only lived here 5 years and have never, ever gotten involved in this until I got my last bill. And then I'm looking over things and saying, you know, I'm coming to a meeting about this audit, and I have to tell you, I'm very disappointed because it's not what I thought the audit would be about, because I think that we all knew the chief assessor was very rude, because I called him once and he told me that if I didn't like the way Nashua did things, I should move. But I'm now reviewing, you know, what's on the website, and I have to be honest, most of it, you go from one portal to another portal, you're missing blocks and everything else. I'm finding whole streets that have absolutely no land value. That, to me, is a problem. And more importantly, I'm going over now, I just took my block, and my block on just the land ranges from $5.37 to $9.37. That's a problem to me. Why am I paying more money than the guy 3 houses down from me for the same piece of land? I assumed that this audit was going to look at the problems within the assessing department as far as the garbage that they have on the website. And I am a little upset about it, because I even looked around, and believe it or not, Sky Meadow is paying 97 cents. No, sorry, it was 19 cents a square foot. And I'm paying $8.66. And I want to know why. And if you look around, there's a street, Bud Way, near the airport. Nobody's paying any land on it. So you people are letting the residents of Nashua pay for all these other firms to be here and not pay any land. I think that's totally unacceptable. And I will be getting letters out tomorrow. I have 5 streets that do not have any land assessment on, which is, and some of them have been, the one over in Bud Way, $5,500,000 to buy that piece of land, and they're not paying any taxes. What is it? But I expected you people to look more at the garbage that was on the website and to find out why, on a short block, our property, our square foot is going from $5 to $9. And I'm sorry if I sound mad, but, I'm looking over these numbers, and I'm a novice at this. I have never been involved in real estate. I got my bills, I paid them. But I'm looking at some of this stuff, and I can't believe it. And I'm getting into now the depreciation. From 2005 to 2018, we should all have the same depreciation, whether it's 10%, 15, or 30. I've looked at like 6 properties. Somebody's 35, somebody's 20, somebody's 6, somebody 4. There's something wrong here. I mean, aren't we all supposed to be treated fairly and at the same rates? I'm sorry, guys, but that's how I feel. I'm very upset because I just can't believe, we all knew. I mean, you had to be a moron not to know that there was a problem in the assessing department. Okay? They said, my MSL said complete reno. They forgot to say that it was complete reno with used equipment. But if I had an inspector there, maybe I wouldn't have had to block off my basement for 4 years and not go down there because of the gas leak. But Nashua failed me because they got a permit on the house, but nobody checked anything. And I spent the next 4 years correcting wiring and everything else just to get it up to standard. Sorry.
And that, anyone else that's here to speak this evening? Okay, seeing no one, do I have a motion? Alderman
Motion to
O'Brien.
adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
I wanted to make the comment if that was possible.
We've already adjourned, sorry.
I had sent it to you, remember?